Hello, everybody. Welcome to the League's. Actually, this is our last pre-conference webinar before we go live into the conference next week. I'm glad you can join us. The reason we do these pre-conference webinars is we know that during the conference, trying to tie you to your computer for days on end and hours each day would be impossible and not fair of us. So we do some of these sessions leading up to the conference, giving all of you that are with us today the opportunity to see it in advance, and then we make it available on demand during the conference for everyone who wasn't able to join us today. So, and then after the conference, as long as you're a member, you have access to this. So please remember that our conference begins officially Monday, July 12th, and goes the 13th and the 14th as well. We're really looking forward to this conference. We're so excited that it happens to be happening as everyone's getting ready to open back up and become a part of the economy again. Boy, it's been quite a year. I know, and we're excited to see all of y'all next week. I wish it was in person. When we had to pull the trigger on the conference, at that point it was still unclear what the world would look like in July. So we are doing one more conference virtually, but we cannot wait to see y'all, and we promise we will be back in person next year. We will be in the wonderful city of Cleveland, which is where we were planning to go before all of the world changed on us. Just want to let you know, before I introduce our speakers today, if you have a question, we will leave time for questions at the end. Try to use the Q&A icon to ask those questions, because that's easier for me to monitor and make sure those questions get answered. I will be monitoring the chat because I'm not a presenter today. So if you put a question over there, I'll try to get it to our presenters as well. But the best place to do it is over in the Q&A section, because I'm able to check it off and know whether it got answered or not, and just sort of keep it more orderly that way. I feel like I'm forgetting to tell y'all something, but we've done this so often, I think y'all know how this goes. So let me just go ahead and introduce our speakers, and then I'm just sort of going to disappear in the background, because I'm a participant today too. I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. We have Terry Vanderwell with us, who has been with Evergreen for over 30 years, joining the New York office in 1984, before moving to Chicago in 1997 to establish the firm's Midwest office. Terry has extensive experience in field work, which includes plaster and decorative paint restoration, as well as mural creation and conservation, while also serving as a project manager for Evergreen during his tenure. Terry has managed hundreds of projects, many large multi-phase projects, including numerous historic theaters. Terry is often called upon to assist prospective clients throughout the country in developing scopes of work, budget, scheduling, and complex project coordinations. So folks, we have one of the true experts with us today. And joining Terry is Jennifer Tankliff, and Jennifer is the president and co-owner with iWeiss. Since joining the company in 1994, Jennifer has worked on over 40 restoration projects for some of the nation's most historic theaters. Prior to becoming president, Jennifer led iWeiss's drapery business, where she oversaw the design and installation of custom stage curtains and backdrops for over 500 Broadway shows and touring productions. As a true leader in the space, Jennifer's unmatched passion for the arts, paired with her team first management style, has been a key driver of iWeiss's growth and success over the past 27 years. When she isn't working, Jennifer can be found traveling, enjoying all types of entertainment with her husband and 8-year-old twins. And Jennifer and Terry, I just want to tell you thank you, because both of your companies have been members and sponsors of the League for many years. And so we appreciate that you're once again here to help us and help our members. And Jennifer, I have to tell you one thing, and then I promise I'll shut up and go away. But most people, I don't know that I've ever said this, and I don't know why, because considering what I do, my first job out of high school, and I won't mention the company name, but you'll know, it'll be our little secret. You'll know who they were just as soon as I tell you the city of San Antonio. But I worked for a scenic and stage curtain company. You know who I'm talking about. And my job was to unload the giant bolts of fabric from the truck as they arrived and get them to the storage room so that they could then go in and be turned into stage curtains. And let me tell you something, in San Antonio, Texas, in July with 100+ degree weather, unloading giant. So yeah, it was quite the job. My worst day was when counterweights arrived. It needed to be painted. and I had to spread 1,000 counterweights across the parking lot so they could be painted black, and then I had to flip them over, each over one at a time, so then they could be painted on the other side black. And they were rusty and sharp, and they cut through my gloves. But anyway, so so I actually have been in this world for quite some time. Okay, so but that's it. Y'all know too much about me already, and I've talked too much. I'm going to go away. I will come back at the end and handle your questions.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Thank you to the League and Ken for having us today. We also want to thank Rachel, who is manning our presentation for us. You won't see her, but she's behind the scenes and has helped us get through this in great detail. We're here today to discuss the value of the visual impact of your space on your patrons. The value is unmeasurable, and it's not what sells the tickets. But recently, I came across a comment on a blog post about the King's Theater in Brooklyn, and the comment was, and I quote, and it was a nice comment on the internet, so take that for what it is. "I went there last night. What a beautiful theater, so rich and grand. I spent half the afternoon staring at the walls and ceiling." A patron has normally paid to see what's behind the curtain, but overall, the experience will have them returning to the space show after show. When first admiring a historic theater, people will usually notice the ornamental and decorative painting, but a wide variety of textiles contribute to the overall appearance of the theater.
Our collaboration with iWeiss is often as part of the design team. We will often begin with a finishes investigation to learn what we can about the original historic finishes, and fabrics are an important part of those finishes. The investigation and design phase will include a review of historic documents, including historical images, working with the architect or owner to understand any known changes that have occurred over time, identifying conditions, thorough examinations, and sampling on site, a report documenting our findings, creating samples and mock-ups of the finishes, and renderings of design options. This information will guide the design team in developing the appropriate means and methods for the restoration.
As this slide will show you a review, it will show you a review of the historical photos, the creation of the renderings, the sampling of the fabrics before and with paint, and all the way to the setup of the finished product and in our shop. This is an overall collaboration of the team. And our collaboration does not stop at the main curtain or just the drapery. It goes into other textiles and finishes.
A wide variety of textiles contribute to the overall appearance of theaters. They can include painted fire curtains, painted drops and oleos, painted or embroidered applique decoration on draperies, lambrequins, screens, murals, acoustic fabric, painted silk, scrim, upholstered or wall-mounted fabrics, carpeting, hung tapestries, and more. We're going to look at some examples of different textiles from past restorations. This slide shows artists in our studio replicating missing historic tapestries. At the Tampa Theater, several of the historic tapestries of the lobbies had disappeared over time. We used historic photographs and information from the existing tapestries to accurately recreate the missing ones. Replicating original tapestries using paint is a much more economical approach to achieve the same look and feel of the real tapestry. This can help when budgets are tight.
Here we will review the differences between painted versus embroidered draperies. As an example, we're showing you the Cutler Majestic Theater at Emerson College. In 1903, the original drapery would have been embroidered, using a technique to create the texture and the depth of the drapery elements, as you can see in this photo. Fast forward to the renovation of 2003, we worked with Evergreen to create that texture and that depth using paint, along with trimmings, fringes, and tassels. In 2001, iWeiss worked with the Fox Theater in Atlanta to repair and restore their historic embroidered and jeweled main curtain. We cleaned the face, we cleaned each jewel, and we made all needed repairs to the fabric. All of this was done in our warehouse in New York City. We added a fire retardant lining and cleaned and repaired the existing fringe. This was a case where the restoration was necessary, as replacing it would have changed the overall aesthetic value of the space.
Deadly theater fires in the early 1900s led to the use of asbestos fire curtains. These were often painted with murals or advertising banners and were a key element in the historic appearance of the theater. Fear of the asbestos material has caused the disposal of many fire curtains, but these curtains can be safely restored. They must first be encapsulated as part of the restoration process. We're going to show part of a short video that takes you through the restoration process following the sealing or encapsulation of the asbestos material. This is a video of the Colony Theater in Marietta, Ohio. Rachel, you may need to unmute your mic.
Hey, Rachel, under the shared screen icon, you have to check a box that says share your sound. Otherwise,
as Hunt said, my name is Forrest Filler. This is Terry Brackenbury. We're from Evergreen Painting Studios. We're from New York City. Our company does restoration like this around the country and internationally. We're excited to be here. It's a beautiful piece from 1919. This curtain is manufactured in asbestos, but it's not a harm to the public. In 1919, fire codes dictated that you would have a curtain that would drop. There's a channel you can see here, and it would drop down if there was a fire on stage, and so it would protect the audience from any stage fires that happened. And so asbestos, being an excellent insulator, was a fireproof material. And so what they've done is, if you can sort of visualize like a knitting yarn that you might use to knit, it's sort of that diameter of woven asbestos into this sort of yarn, and then that was woven through, it looks like it's copper, very thin gauge, copper wire. And that is the support here. That's what this is actually made of. On top of this is a priming layer, and then the actual paint layer. The paint is a distemper, and distemper is an aqueous medium, which means it's water-based, and what it's made of is a pigment mixed with a binder, and the binder is like an animal skin glue. So that would be a historic, sort of traditional painting material. It's also important that in theater drops like this, you'd use a matte painted material, because since there's a lot of light bouncing onto the curtain, you don't want to have gloss and different sheens. So by using something like casein, which is a milk paint, or distemper, which is the case here, which is a animal skin glue, as I said, you can achieve a very matte and consistent product. It's in great condition. We came here 2 weeks ago to work on the curtain. When we came, the front and back were heavily soiled. There was an old coal furnace in the back down in the basement, so the back now is about a tan color, but when we came here, the reverse was like sort of a black almost, you know, and that was just all that dust. Because it's a water-based paint, we were not able to clean it with sort of aqueous, which is water-based, or solvent, organic solvents. So we had to use a dry cleaning process. And so we mechanically cleaned both the front and back. Once we'd done that, we encapsulated the reverse with a polymer material to seal the asbestos from the reverse. The front is already encapsulated by paint, but we also then varnished it to protect the paint layer from damages and moisture. Once we'd done that, we did some structural work. There were some rips and tears and holes, and so we've been doing patching and sealing up things with epoxy. The upper right corner, where there's a steel pipe that supports the curtain, there was about 1.5 feet which had ripped off and was hanging in a flap. So we had to do some sewing and re-stitch it back up, and then use some different adhesives and patching, and then in-paint it to make it match. So of the 2 different types of damages we had to paint, there's something called in-painting. And to in-paint means there's a small loss or an area where the paint has flaked off. We'll just carefully dot in a color to match in just that area. And so we did that kind of restoration. There were some areas where water damage had removed large areas of paint, and those were mostly, and thankfully, in field color areas. So in an area like up along that trompe-l'oeil curtain, trompe-l'oeil means trick the eye in French. So you can see how it looks like it's an actual folded curtain when it's in reality just painted. And so some of those areas were heavily damaged, so we had to re-implement using more paint like acrylics and make that match. So those were the two different types of painting that we did. That's pretty much the story with this.
This slide shows Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, Pennsylvania. This former grist mill was saved from demolition in the 1930s when a small group of artists rallied the community to renovate it as a theater. Charles Child, Julia Child's brother, painted the curtain and depicted the town of New Hope, which included local landmarks and emphasized New Hope's reputation as an artist colony. It's important to retain these curtains as part of the theater, often because of their historical importance or strong ties to the local community.
What do you do if the original is no longer in existence during a historical renovation? That was the case with the Balboa Theater in San Diego during the renovation in 2008. The team will review all historic documents and work together with the architect, theater consultant to engineer the construction of all elements. We would work on samplings of all aspects, including fabrics, colors, and techniques. This one was digitally printed, was not painted. And going beyond the main, we go to an area of the theater called the lambrequin. A lambrequin is a short piece of decorative drapery hung over the top of a door or window or draped from a shelf or mantelpiece. They can also be architectural in the form of multiple arches, lambrequin arches. At the King's Theater, shown in this photo, they used both fabric and architectural lambrequins. At the Nederlander, they are fabric with details of extensive trimmings, fabrics made into trimmings, tassels, and fringes. When looking to recreate a fabric used in wall coverings, if lucky, an original panel exists, as is the case with the center photo shown here. We were able to see the back of the original wall fabric and recreate the pattern for restoring the original look and feel of the space. At both the King's and the State Theater, a review of initial findings took place, and Evergreen would recreate the imagery in a design program to assign a shape, a scale, and a color for review by the creative team and owner. Weiss would work with fabric suppliers to create the sampling and the overall textile, as well as do the installation of the upholstery.
Fabrics in theaters were often designed to be part of an acoustical treatment. Some damask patterns are stretched over horsehair to help dampen the sound. The Warner Theater is a unique project with an unusual wall covering. The fabric at the wall panels are from the 1930s Art Deco period, known to all involved with the project as monkey fur. The fabric is unique and a significant part of the interior's finishes. The fabric's textured and looks almost like carpet. The fabric had become so soiled it looked brown. The fabric was replicated and the color and texture were brought back to life. The Grand Opera House in Meridian, Mississippi is another very unique project. It was built in 1903 on the second floor of a department store. The owners of the store wanted to bring some culture to the community. The Opera House was decorated with wallpaper that was available at the department store. As the case with other interiors, the lower, easy-to-reach surfaces were repainted, or in this case, repapered, more often than the higher and less accessible spaces. It was closed in 1927, and at some point in time, the stairs to the theater were removed. It was opened back up in the year 2000 and was essentially a time capsule. 49 different wallpapers spanning 25 years were identified. 25 of the papers were chosen to be conserved or replicated as part of the restoration. The methods used to replicate the wallpaper included flocking, which is what you see them doing in the central image, metallic and glitter finishes, the reproduction of anaglypta, which is an imitation tooled leather, by casting methods and hand-painted decorative finishes, traditional hand blocking methods, and digitally printed and produced papers to replicate a variety of historically hand-blocked and machine-printed papers. As you can see, there are numerous considerations when you think about the different fabric elements that are part of the theater restorations. And at this time, we welcome any questions you might have.
There we go. Hey guys, we've got a couple of great questions. Hang on, I had a weird screen open up in front of me. And the first one came like very quickly. Our velvet curtain buntings, trimming, the proscenium arch and pipe organ chambers have been hanging for 20 years and are dusty and likely mildew. What is the most economical yet effective way to have them cleaned?
Well, I would start with getting as close as possible to them to see if they are indeed mildewed or dry rotted, which is more likely the case. Usually a good brushing and vacuuming is enough without taking them down, because once you take them down, you risk ripping and tearing, all of that. You really should be tested for flame retardancy. That's a big issue on a lot of those pieces that are hanging so far that you can't get to them. But overall, a good hand brushing, that's what we did for the Fox Atlanta, is there was a dry cleaning process. There's no water involved. There's no chemicals involved. It's brushing and cleaning or vacuuming of the dirt and grime. Usually that will restore the look.
Coming out of COVID, we're all so focused on extra cleanings, and we've all really been focused on our seating. Is there anything we should be paying attention to when it comes to either our decorative plaster work or our additional fabrics that are hanging more vertically in the theater versus just the seating fabric? Do y'all have any, has anything come out? Are any of the cleaning items, have we been alerted to anything that's removing paint or destroying things?
I would say that for the fabrics, it's sort of the same technique. And really, you know, as somebody who works in fabrics, you should be caring for them often, at least once a year or once every 6 months. There should be a brushing or a dusting of your surface of your fabrics. As you can see on that picture of the wall fabric, there was a complete black front and the real fabric on the back. So you can see over 100 years what it does, what it builds up on. Yeah. And I would tell you that most likely no one ever brushed or vacuumed them. So for the fabrics, you could get up and brush them, use a broom, a clean broom. For the walls, I don't know if there's a specific cleaning, but.
Okay, but and at this point, we're not hearing of any of these new and more deep cleaning with COVID in mind causing any.
No, not for us. No.
So you spoke briefly of the original fire curtains being made out of asbestos, which we all know scares people. And actually, real quick, so there's a question: could we discuss a little bit more the process that you need to go through to make those safe? I noticed on one of the curtains you showed the little logo asbestos. So on some of them, it's right out there.
One time they were proud of it.
Yeah, well, right. And I actually worked at used to work at the Paramount Theater in Austin, and we have a lovely, beautiful original fire curtain with the pastel scene and everything. And I knew that it had been sealed and protected. But I heard one day on the El Hat Chat someone talking about removing their fire curtain and what was the process, and I was just horrified because I assumed they all looked like that. And I said, "Oh no, you must save it, and there's a way to make it safe, and don't worry, and send me a picture of it so I can see it." And when they sent me, the entire curtain was the giant asbestos logo, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I could see why you might want to remove that one." Yeah, at one time asbestos was, like Tupperware. It was a brand that everybody was fine with. But so Terry or Jennifer, what is that process that you have to go through, and how often do you need to go back to that to make sure that those of us that are keeping our original fire curtains aren't dealing with any sort of asbestos danger?
Yep, it's a clear, I assume like an acrylic, some sort of waterborne material that's sprayed on and meant to seal and create a barrier that traps the fibers. I'm not sure what the longevity is or how often they recommend inspecting it, but I would think that you'd want to at least look at the track where it's riding, and because that's one place where there might get some abrasion. I think maybe the along the edges might be inspected periodically, and I don't know offhand what the recommendation for that inspection would be.
A lot of times it's up to the authority having jurisdiction too. Someone might say you can't keep it at all, and others may include you grandfathering it in. And as long as it's encapsulated, usually, you know, the inspection process really depends on the authority.
Yeah. I remember when we were doing some backstage restoration work on our dressing rooms, there was a conversation when we came across asbestos, whether it should be remain in place and sealed or whether it should be removed. So I know that it, you know, the idea that you can encapsulate it and seal it is a solution. I do have to tell you, because I actually learned this word during your presentation too, but the gentleman who asked that first question has now realized apparently what he was describing is a lambrequin, lambrequin. When he was describing the fabric above his doorway.
Right,
so
exactly.
We've all learned something new.
Yay.
How do you counteract the reputation of asbestos fire curtain and elevate how to go about viewing and elevating and persuading donors that it is worth restoring? Then how often is it brought down to be seen and appreciated? So this is a sort of a repeat of the question we just had a minute ago. And I can tell you that because I wasn't dealing with anything that said asbestos, it was easier for me to celebrate that curtain at the Paramount. But really, I did go to great extremes to let people know that it was historic and that we had done everything we could do to make sure that it was safe. But is there anything y'all come across when you've, like that one you showed that has asbestos written on it? I gotta believe that had to be a long conversation about, do we keep it? Or
I imagine if you did a little video of the process and marketed the process as you know, explain what you're doing, I imagine that would be as good a communicator as you could get.
So Julie, do know that you are not unique. Like there are many of these curtains around the nation that have been saved and are in place. So sharing that certainly I know would help too. Jennifer, did you want to, by the way, y'all, I know Terry, you had it too. There's construction outside my window. So if y'all are hearing anything, I apologize. No. I'm hoping this mic is muting that. But Jennifer, did you want to add anything to that?
No, just that I think the first step is to talk to someone in restoration, whether it's Evergreen or another company, and then also your authority having jurisdiction. It's very important that they're involved in the process so that there's no surprises when they walk on site to do an inspection. All of this is documented. There are, you know, MSDS sheets for everything. So as long as you're contacting the right people and not trying to seal it with clear paint on your own, I think that that's the key, using the right companies.
Material, yeah.
I've been gone from the Paramount now, I can't believe it, but 9 years. So I don't remember, but I know there was some sort of sign off that we got. And I just, yes. I seem to remember that there was an inspection that came every few years just to make sure. Does painting on acoustic panels ruin the acoustic properties, and is fabric better?
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was going to say that acoustic panels on wall coverings could be either wallpaper or fabric. I would assume a paint wouldn't create the same baffle, but I don't know that answer. I would assume anything with a backing and a fabric, whether it be wallpaper with a backing or fabric with a backing, creates a better acoustic property.
I know historically the walls were painted, except where there's fabric treatments. Modern new acoustic panels and acoustic plasters, they prefer not to be painted. They prefer integral color. But I know that they say, you know, it can take one coat of paint if it's done with the special paint and it's fogged on instead of brushed or rolled, because the coating is hard. The paint coating is hard. So they do say that it starts to affect with each coat of paint, the acoustical rating goes down. So I'm not sure if you mean on a particular surface, but imagine just a plain plaster surface isn't going to be affected too much with a coat of paint.
So Allison, if we didn't answer that question, just if you'll give us a little bit more detail, I'm happy to bring it back up again. I'm sort of curious, fabric on the walls, which, I see in many theaters, was that more of just, hey, this is another decorative way to do this, or was it truly acoustics that kind of decided that was
I would say you'd have to, go back and understand how long it's been in place. But for the most part, they are backed with a baffle of some sort. Old days would be horsehair. Now would be more of I'm trying to think, like a Dacron or something that has airflow through it. So I would say my guess would be is that it had some acoustic properties, and it was probably less expensive than painting the walls. And
Yeah.
wallpaper may not have been the choice back then, in the 1900s, early 1900s, not when I was born in the 1900s, but so
Okay,
Terry,
laugh.
What?
Even if you didn't quite hear what she said, haha, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I always tell people
not
I'm born in
believing.
the 1900s now. It's kind of weird, right? Okay.
Yeah, no, I had to do an introduction of a show on the new Performing Arts Center in Austin one time, and I told everybody it's my favorite theater built this millennium. So that way I
Exactly.
didn't have to take away anything from the Paramount. Terry, were you going to say something?
Just that in the photo we saw where the damask fabric had peeled back, it was put directly over a hard surface. So I think there would be some acoustic property just having a soft fabric on top, but sometimes they put horsehair behind it, which I think would increase the acoustic properties. But I have seen theaters like the photo of the Warner with the almost a carpet-like fabric on would have, I would suspect, even more acoustic properties. And I have seen theaters with panels like that were actually a half-inch thick asbestos plastered on. But then as it gets painted over time, it helps seal it in, but then it loses that acoustic property. So I know that there have been theaters that are searching for modern acoustic plasters typically want to be 1.5 inches thick. So without destroying that profile, it's hard to find something today that's a 1/2 inch thick that replaces that asbestos. But it's been painted several times too, so the acoustic properties have been lessened.
Yeah.
So
Terry, I was told one time, because you mentioned horsehair, I was told one time that the plaster at the Paramount, the binding agent in the original plaster, was horsehair. Did I understand that right, or were they talking about something else I misunderstood?
I've seen historical references to goat hair, to coconut fibers, horsehair. Yeah. So.
So I think what was told, so the Paramount in Austin is in Everson, and I think I was told that was an old world technique that he used, but whether it was true or not, I certainly shared that exciting story with donors to make it sound that much more interesting. We are in an old powerhouse that has been converted to a theater. What is the best fabric to use for blacking out tall windows that would be resistant to fade from the sunlight hitting it?
Well, I would go right away to making sure whatever material you pick has a backing on it. Backings, just like you see in a standard hotel, anything with a white backing will reflect the light. So we tend to use a blackout liner on anything that you really need a specific blackout. And then you can choose a decorative fabric for the front. But a black velour, black serge, anything like that will allow you to block the light, but you won't get the reflective nature as a blackout lining.
So it would literally just be absorbing the light and the heat.
Exactly, and the heat. So if you put something with that white, and almost everyone who has been to a hotel has seen that, because it's back there, it looks chintzy, but it actually does the job. When you close the drapes, the light is, the room gets dark. It's a room darkening material.
Okay. A follow-up on the asbestos question. If the theater determines that it can't be kept, where do asbestos curtains go to die or live on? I think they go to die, but do we know? I mean, you would have to go through obviously some official removal, remediation, and
I imagine they have a special landfill where that is certified to be taken.
There are companies here in New York, I know, who do a lot of the school construction in New York City public schools, for instance, who have asbestos curtains, and there's specific asbestos companies who come in. They come in, do an overnight, and they dispose. Obviously, they have to be certified to do that. So again, they probably have a special place and a special method of disposal.
I remember at the State Theater in Austin, it was unfortunate because it was most of the decorative elements that were left, but they were delaminating asbestos panels. And the conversation was more about where they were going to end up as opposed to removing them. So I do know, Julie, that is something you need to get an answer to. You can't just go out in the dumpster. So I can promise you that. And there is an authority in your community that knows that answer. As a novice, I'd like a brief discussion on the fire curtain's everyday use. Was it kept closed and raised at each showing? Do we know that?
I suspect that it needed to be lowered. Well, that's a good question. Maybe.
The only thing that I know that I'm aware of is that it used to be brought in to when the audience was in place to show them that it was a working barrier between them and the stage. I think in Europe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they still do that. They still lower it before the performance, raise it up if there's a show curtain, but it's basically a visual so people know that they're protected from any elements on the stage that could ignite. I don't believe here, and again, if there's any ASTA members, they might tell me I'm wrong, but there are some talks about having that be the case, but I don't believe we have to do that as a law here.
Yeah. And some of them are so decorative and so beautiful. It'd be a shame to think that they're not in place at times for the audience to see. I know at the Paramount, we used to make a big deal about, like, the stage crew, whether this was true or not, they liked to use it as little as possible because of the wear and tear, because it was original back to 1905.
And they're usually worried about them actually going out again.
Yeah.
Right? So they're usually like, bring them in. They're worried about the rigging and things working again. So as long as it's not the law to bring it in, most people don't want to. I would assume that if it has to be inspected, they'll have to bring it in. But I don't believe it is, once the show's closed at night, that it has to be brought in, because really it's the barrier between the stage and the audience. Yeah, that's what it is.
If you've got a really beautiful one, and at the Paramount, because the stage crew didn't like to bring it in often, we made a big deal about how rare it was and how unusual it was to be able to see it. So if we brought it in for a show, we made that a big production for the audience, but we also would once a year invite major donors to the theater to stand in front of it and have a photograph. Many of them used it for their Christmas card backdrops and stuff like that. But we made a big deal out of, this curtain's over 100 years old, and here's what it is, and blah 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 blah. So
it's great.
It's funny that we're getting a lot of questions about the fire curtains, because that was actually one of my favorite things at the theater, was that fire curtain. So this is back to the person who asked the original question. Her community has been suggested for replacing. So Julie, I'm not sure I understand. So rock wool has been suggested for replacing about 2 inches behind our fabric acoustic panels, water damaged. What is the cost of replicating the covering fabric brocade look, or is there a swatch book of contemporary fabrics? Julie, I'm sorry that I've just sort of ruined your question there. I'm for some reason, I'm having trouble getting those words to all come together. Did that make sense, what I just read?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that there are off-the-shelf, damask materials. So, there are definitely companies who specialize in that motif type stuff. Recreating is more expensive because you're paying for the design. So you have to design it and then somebody to weave it, because all of that fabric is woven. I couldn't tell you the price because it depends on a lot of different things, whether you want to weave it with silk, whether you want to weave it with a different material, and what the overall design is. But there are off-the-shelf options. It will vary depending on the overall width of the material, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But there are some off-the-shelf options.
Can you speak a little about the maintenance of curtains in relation to fireproofing and testing? Should we be testing fabrics on our walls like we do with our stage curtains? Can trim and decorative elements be cleaned and retreated repeatedly, or is there a lifespan? I've heard that after so many years, curtains can no longer be cleaned and refireproofed.
So this is a topic of conversation. We were going to touch on this, but we decided to leave it out because it does have a lot of questions that come up with it. It really depends, again, on the authority having jurisdiction. So in New York City, they're very strict. So they come into a theater and they'll take a match to your drape directly in the space. And that's, it's rare, but they will do that. In some places, they never come around at all. So ultimately, the way our company is liability-wise is we say you should test your drapes every year. Now, you don't have to hire us. You can hire a local company to come in to do that. Anyone can get certified. You have to just understand how to test in the field. There is a method, a documented method of testing. But for the most part, if your fabric burns, it burns because of dirt and oil and buildup on it. So your fabric is, depending on the material, the flame retardant will reduce over the years. An IFR, or inherently flame retardant fabric, which everyone loves, still gets a buildup of dirt and oils.
Okay.
That can still burn. So it's the technique of cleaning and caring for your curtains is really important as part of your space. So again, like wall coverings, brushing them, you don't have to necessarily test them because they're not getting as exposed like the front and the back of every other curtain. But brushing them periodically is part of your maintenance, and brushing your trims and your fringes, they can all be treated again. We use a water-based treatment, and there's no harmful chemicals in it. We were just at the King's Theater today doing theirs. So I think it's important to know that it's maintenance. It's a maintenance item. I once had a tree guy tell me, "Oh, you haven't cut your trees in like 30 years." I said, "Well, we haven't lived here in 30 years." And he said, "Yeah, but this is part of your yard maintenance. You have somebody cut your grass every week, but nobody ever touches the trees." So it's the same thing in your theater. You may have your seats, tightened, and your railings because of ADA and all this other stuff, but your drapes are part of your maintenance as well.
I was just sitting here thinking, I'm so glad we're doing this session, because I do think many of us probably take some of that for granted. It looks pretty, and so I leave it alone. And in fact, what I'm hearing y'all stress is, no, this is, and I was going to make the same example you did, which is, your seats and everything. But so great. So our final question, and unless anyone wants to add another question, but right now this is going to be our final question. Do you have any examples of maintenance plans or calendars for your backstage area? We've recently replaced and upgraded everything, but now how to keep it that way? So obviously some of this might not be in y'all's area of expertise, but is there anything you would like to?
Well, I could say that we do theater inspections and rigging inspections as well. And we also manufacture our own rigging equipment. And our inclination for people is to operate your line sets, listen for noise, and making sure that there's no obstructions in your space. So it's again about maintenance. If you go up on your grid and you see soda cans and loose elements, there shouldn't be anything loose on your grid. There shouldn't be anything tucked in behind your roadblocks and your arbors. So I think it's overall cleanliness and maintenance, and then listen as you operate your line sets, and then obviously hire professionals to do a real inspection. It doesn't have to necessarily be annual, but you'll get better maintenance out of an annual inspection than you will, leaving it for 5 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it happens with employee turnover. So if you have, new people coming in, road tours coming in, if there isn't an essential person to look at that stuff, it tends to deteriorate.
Got another question that came in. So sorry that I thought that was the last one, but speaking from a 40-year closed and stripped down, simply decorated, streamlined, modern theater that is missing its curtains, can you determine the design of the curtains from the remaining rigging and motors that are there?
I would say overall, what we would do is we would do an inspection of the rigging and the motors that are in place. You would obviously be able to do the scale and the size of them. And then we would work with you on what your needs are, because ultimately, I don't necessarily think everyone needs the full package. What is the end user going to use it for? And then we build your package based on that. Whether you need fullness or you need a fancy main curtain, there are so many options. But working with the user, the end user, and what your goals are for the space is how to determine what you need in that space. For the front of house, it depends on your budget because there's a lot to do in the front of house. But backstage, we can determine what what your needs are based on what's there, but also what you're ultimately going to use.
Terry, I want it predated me, but years ago at the Paramount's restoration, I know Evergreen was involved in it, and I remember that there was some exciting process because all they had were black and white photos, but y'all were able to tell by different things in the photo, even though they weren't in color, like what color everything was or stuff. Like, I mean, it's very detailed work. Yeah.
So from black and white photos, sometimes you can see which elements reflect because a gilded surface will reflect either very white or very dark. And so elements that keep changing light to dark will often indicate that it was gilded or leafed. But we'll do a paint study where we'll carefully strip back the overpaint down to the original so that we kind of get a look at the original surface and help identify the color. But we'll also take paint chips and look at them on the bias under a microscope so that we can see how many layers of paint there are and can also match colors under a microscope. That isn't soiled it isn't a soiled surface, but rather seen from the edge. So there's several techniques that we use to help identify the colors.
So I'm sorry if you saw me smiling. I just realized looking over in the chat that my former stage manager was at the Paramount had joined us today. Pasquale, hey, how are you? I hope I wasn't telling any untruths when I was speaking about my experiences at the theater. Terry and Jennifer, I actually now have a personal question that I'd like to ask both of you because I'm very familiar with your companies and how many theaters you have restoration projects and renovations that you've been involved with. So I know this isn't fair. I get asked this all the time. Do you have a favorite? Like, does one jump out at you as like, man, that was the most extraordinary theater I've been in? So Jennifer, what was yours?
Well, the only thing I would say is I chose this background because in Madison, Wisconsin, there is a theater, and this theater, when they proposed renovating it, and I saw the colors, at first I thought, someone is crazy. You know, like in my head, I thought, wow, this is incredible. But the finish and the way it looks, and I made a lot of friends on that job, and just overall, Richard Parks and I both worked on it. We went to Madison so many times. This one is my favorite in that it's just something that I did not believe would look, good together. And here it is, it all just came together and it just looks incredible.
That's
and I haven't seen it in a long time, but the use of the lambrequin on the, at the stage, the use of the swags and the tassels and the fringe and just
beautiful.
The color palette. I don't know. There's just something about it that every time I see that photo in my hallway, I just smile. And the people I met there as well, just everyone. It was a construction crew and theater people who just wanted to work to get the job done. And it was an unbelievable experience for me.
I hope that this is all coming across in the video, but Jennifer, you just lit up when you started talking about it, and I could feel my face just beaming listening to you.
Oh, that's
so Terry,
nice.
Do you have one? Do you have a favorite?
There are two that come to mind. One both here in Chicago. One's the Auditorium Theater, which historically is amazing. Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright was his draftsman at the time, and there's elements within the theater that are also in his first home and studio, which he was building at the time. The amazing mural over the stage and the gilded stenciling. It's just an incredible space, and the history too, which I won't go into, but it was actually had a deck that you could actually went over the bottom seats and turned into an auditorium. So they had circuses and car shows and inside the theater. But But then also the music box is a real small atmospheric theater that is now being used as showing art films and foreign films, and still has a 70mm projector. So when Quentin Tarantino shows his films, one of the 5 places in Northern America is, they show his films as an opening. So I mean, those 2 stand out in my mind. I'm sure I'll think of 5 more immediately.
Well, of course, I'm partial to the Paramount Theater, and I even have to say, the Paramount is one of Quentin's theaters too that he premieres at. But the league has had its national conference in Chicago twice, so we've been in the 2 theaters you were talking about, Terry. So yes, I'm very familiar with those. I have to say the
Paramount is and it's been. The conference has been in Austin as well, and the Paramount is a wonderful theater.
It is. I mean, there's just there's an exaggerated simplicity about it. I know that's probably a made-up term, but it is very grand, but there's a simpleness to its grandness that I really like. And what just blows my mind is the gentleman Everson who designed that is the same gentleman who designed the Tampa Theater in Tampa, Florida, which I believe some of your slides were of the Tampa. And I used to say, he was a decorative genius. And then I saw the Tampa and I'm like, okay, well, he was a mad genius, definitely, because the Tampa Theater, just extraordinary, but the most, like, it just blows your mind. Like, what was he thinking, or what drug was he on when he came up with all that decorative element? So, and we've actually had a regional conference in Tampa. I don't know if we had our national conference in Tampa. I can't remember, but I know we've at least had a regional there. So many of y'all on here might have made it to that. Well, let me see what, one more thing hit the Q&A, and then I'm going to text. I was late joining the Zoom call. Could you please email out the 2 speakers' contact information and their company areas of expertise? So, Jennifer and Terry, do you mind that I email out your?
Nope, not at all.
It'll be an email that'll go out to everyone that was on this call tomorrow.
No problem.
Okay. So yes, we will do that, and I will remind you that at the conference we do have our expo, and all these companies will be represented. You can learn more information, and we actually will have a way for you to reach out to them and say, I'd like more information, or I'd like a one-on-one, meeting with you. So we're going to try to make these and other experts as accessible to you as possible at the conference. It's usually much easier when we're in person because y'all are there with us, but we're going to see how we can do that virtually. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Jennifer and Terry, thank you so much. I appreciate this. Rachel, thank you for everything you did in the background. Thank you everyone for supporting the league. And I'm excited about our conference, but I'm even more excited that y'all have, at this point, seemingly made it through just a terrible, horrible, what's that book title, year, and we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're coming out on the other side, and I can't wait to start hearing the stories of reopenings. So Terry and Jennifer, thank you. Rachel, thank you. Everyone, thank you. Y'all have a good day. And this will be available on demand during the conference, and will live on after that for any member who needs to see it. Thank you both so much. Take care.
Bye. Bye, everybody.